Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to speak with you this afternoon about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and my involvement in the Greensboro Lunch Counter Sit-in in 1960. For many years, I did not share information about my involvement in the civil rights movement to anyone. I didn't share it with my wife. Well, I didn't share it with my father. Didn't share it with my wife, my children. Like I said, no anyone for many, many years. Not until 2010. So you can figure that out. From 1960, I shared it in 2010. That's about what? 50 years. 50 years. So I remained silent on this issue for 50 years. Now, why did I do that? I did that because I did not want a stigma to be attached to me or to my family. I have many friends that was involved in that movement, and they had a very difficult time obtaining a job. And those that did obtain a decent job, once their employer found out about it, many of them were fired or terminated because they kind of put them in a class of what you call what? Troublemakers. And so I didn't want to be attached with that stigma of being a troublemaker, nor did I want my family to be attached with that. So in 2010, I was invited back to Greensboro, North Carolina to receive an award for my participation in the Lunch Counter Sit-in, along with the Greensboro Four. At that particular time, one of the four was deceased, David Richmond. So as a result of having to obtain permission to participate in outside activity, and Judge Grant got wind to the fact that I was going back to receive an award for such, guess what? The word got out. Next thing I knew, Mike Mathis had a big article in the paper, and so, you know, the cover's blown. It's blown. So now I might as well speak about it, right? And so since that time, Judge Grant has encouraged me to really speak about it, and that's what I have been doing. Matter of fact, I have been invited back to several schools because my granddaughter, so once I spoke about it, I shared it with my grandkids, my family and my grandkids. My grandkids went back to school, began to share it with their teachers. The next thing I knew, now I'm invited to their school. They wanted their kids to hear it. And so I've been to a few schools and probably will be more. With respect to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, this is the 50th anniversary of the passing of that act. This act, in my opinion, is one of the most profound civil rights acts passed by Congress. Although there was a Civil Rights Act passed in 1868, following the enactment of the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all those born in the United States and all those naturalized. So essentially, this granted citizenship to African Americans. Also, there was a Civil Rights Act passed after the 15th Amendment was enacted. This amendment granted voting rights to African Americans. But the 1964 Civil Rights Act is so profound in that now for the first time, what came with this particular act is an enforcement agency. The EEOC was created. So all those prior acts, even though there were laws, they simply were what? Not enforced. So we did not realize the benefits that were provided by those particular laws. Prior to passing the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we lived in a segregated society by law, which calls for the separation of the African American and the white races. Those racial segregation laws were referred to as the Jim Crow laws, which was really an outgrowth of the slave codes. These laws were put in place around 1876 and were in effect by de facto several years after the passing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Those laws allow for discrimination against African Americans by white individuals, as well as by the institutions that operated in American society, such as your financial institution, medical, transportation, legal, law enforcement, education, as well as facilities that serve the general public, such as the hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, restroom, water fountain, vending machine, park, lunch counters, and all places of public accommodations, as well as schools, colleges, and hospitals. When segregation and discrimination is sanctioned by institutions, there was no one that we could go to for help. And there was no one you can blame for the plight, your plight, of what was happening to you. The Jim Crow laws were designed to restrict the civil rights and civil liberties of African Americans and to relegate them as a second-class citizen. I grew up under the Jim Crow laws. My parents taught us to be respectful of our elders, obey the laws, and people in position of authority. Now, this kept us out of trouble, because if we got in trouble with the laws, we were not afforded protection under those laws, nor were we afforded due process. And so therefore, our neighbors, your extended family members, and if they saw you get out of line, then they took a role in terms of pulling us back, disciplining us, informing our parents. I guess you heard the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, back then, our community was a village, and it took a role in really keeping us in line and out of trouble, especially with the law. So African Americans look to education as being an avenue for a better life and for overcoming stereotypes, for overcoming misconceptions, and for overcoming the second-class citizenship. I am the fourth of 8 siblings and the first to go to college. I can recall telling my father when I was in around the 10th grade that I wanted to go to college. And he said, "Son, I really want you to go to college, but there's no way. We simply cannot afford it." I said, "Pop, don't worry about it. I will find a way." I didn't know how, but I was determined. I said, "I will find a way." I began to tell my classmate, guess what? I'm going to college. And you can tell when people do not believe you. They will say, "Oh, that's nice." I would tell my teachers, "I'm going to college." And I had no idea, but I was going to go to college. And just so happened, my history teacher really admired my determination, and he took an interest in me. And so he sent away for me to take an exam for a National Science Foundation grant. So I took the exam and I received that grant. That grant was only to allow me to go to summer school immediately after I finished high school, just for that one summer, to take science courses on a college campus. And while I was in summer school, I applied for a national defense loan. I received that loan. I also obtained a part-time job in the post office. So now I'm all set. I can return back in September to college. I stayed in the same dormitory as the Greensboro 4. I was a very close friend of Joe McNeil. Joe majored in physics engineering. I majored in electrical engineering. And I was a friend of Ezra Blair. Ezra Blair, the type that really, I don't know if you have any people on campus like this, but he wore a bow tie on campus and to all his classes. So he kind of stood out. Then there was Franklin McCain. He was from Washington, D.C., and David Richmond. He was from Greensboro, North Carolina. I was not aware that those guys had been holding discussions in the dormitory room and kind of daring each other to do something about the discrimination and the segregation in the South. And they had been talking about, I didn't know they was plotting to start a sit-in at F.W. Woolworth store in Greensboro. I can recall Joe telling us, and Joe really was kind of the spokesperson, was telling us just how despicable his experience was coming from New York by bus to Greensboro, North Carolina. He said the way he was treated, not only the way he was treated in terms of not being able to eat at the lunch counter, had to sit in a segregated waiting area, treated like he was invisible, then talked down to. And so he said by the time he got to Greensboro, he felt like he was a pariah. And so he would say that is just simply despicable. When you go downtown Greensboro and you pass Woolworth store, the lunch counter is visible from the street, and you can see all the seats in there. And we were prohibited from sitting at the lunch counter. You can order something, but you have to take it out. And so Joe and his three other friends, they decided that they were going to sit at the lunch counter and demand to be served. So one afternoon, Joe and the Fortis, they really followed through with their dare of each other. I dare you to do it. No, I dare you to do it. So they decided that they were going to do it, and they actually did sit at the counter. The manager really didn't know how to deal with the situation, and he told his workers, look, just leave the kids alone. They will get tired and they'll go back to campus. They were not served. They asked to be served. Of course, first of all, they bought an item to avoid from being a trespasser. Then they came back to campus, and Joe began to share with us what he and the other three had done. And he said he needed more people. We needed more people to go down. This is what we've done, you know. We didn't get arrested, and so now we need more people to go down. I wasn't prepared to be one of those more people. The difficulties that I had in terms of getting to college, now am I going to sacrifice that? You know what I mean? And so that was in the forefront of my mind, you know. Am I going to sacrifice that? And my mindset was self-preservation. I kept hearing the words, self-preservation. And so I said, Joe, I'm not prepared to be one of those more people. The next day, about 24 went down, and nobody got arrested. The news media picked it up. Now the momentum began to grow in terms of the support for the sit-in. The next day, about 60 went down. And Joe came back and nobody got arrested. And also, during that third day, a number of white boys began to engage them and to try to occupy what seats weren't occupied, to try to reserve them, to hold them for white individuals. And so Joe came back that night, began to share this, said, look, we need a lot of more people to go down now. Okay. And I said, there's 63 seats there, and we need to occupy all of them. We really need to go down. We need a lot of people to go down. I began to reflect on the plight of African Americans and began to counsel myself in saying, even if I did obtain a college education, I still would be relegated as a second-class citizen. I still would be subjected to the Jim Crow laws. And no matter what I achieved in life, I still would be considered and referred to as a boy. I also reflected on the day that I left home to go to college. I can recall my father taking me to the bus station because I had a Foot Locker. I don't know if you guys carry Foot Lockers now. Well, I had a Foot Locker, and we checked it, and it was put on the bus. And I had a small bag. I got on the bus, and my father got on the bus with me, brought my small bag. And I went where I was supposed to go. And where was that? Where? To the back of the bus. I went to the back of the bus. That was where I was supposed to go. And my father was back there. We were chatting for a few minutes. And shortly thereafter, other folks began to get on the bus, and the front section, white individuals began to come in and sit in the front section. And my father decided, well, it's time for him to get off the bus. So as he tried to exit the bus driver wouldn't let him leave and began to just curse him out in front of me and in front of everybody else, telling him he's no good this, no good in that. And after he cursed him out, I mean, there was no other way to get off the bus. There's only one door, one way. So after he completely cursed him out, and then he said, you know, pull his hand, now get off my GD bus. When my father took me to the bus station, you would think that he had won the lottery and came into $1 million. He was so happy that he had a son, someone in his family, his child is going to college. So when they let him off the bus, that big smile was not there. As a matter of fact, it was somewhat of a frown. But I admired him. He just stood there and took it. He never said a word. He did not want to jeopardize my career, because if he said something and the bus driver engaged him, then sure I would have been involved as well. And so if we get involved and get thrown into jail, who knows what was going to happen. So he was determined not to sacrifice that, so he just stood there and took it. So as the bus was pulling off from the station, I just began to pray. I said, Lord, please let my father be treated like a man in his lifetime. The bus driver did not know that my father was a single parent of 8 kids. I can recall him taking my mother to the hospital before going to school one morning. For a procedure. And during the procedure, she began to hemorrhage. She needed a blood transfusion. Blacks were treated in the lower level of the hospital, segregated lower level basement of the hospital. They did not have sufficient blood for a blood transfusion for my mother. They had blood upstairs in the white section, but they wouldn't give it to her. They told my father that he had to go out and find donors. And so he went out. He said he was knocking on doors that he knew, people doors he did not know. And you know, your sense of urgency is not always the same as others. So by the time the folks got there to give blood and got prepped, it was too late. My mother was dying. And he said the last word she said to him was, John, take care of my children. And he said that is what he intended to do. I can recall that we were called to the principal's office around 11:30 that morning. And my father was there. And he shared the news about our mother passing. We had a difficult time processing that because she was only 32 years old. And besides, she was the center of our world. Now, how were we going to make it now without our mother? So people began to come by the house, neighbors, other family members, church members. And they would tell my father, they said, John, there's no way a man can take care of 8 kids. And some of them are babies. And they began to say, well, I'll take that one. And somebody said, no, I'll take that one. Somebody said, no, I'll take this one. My father ended up putting everybody out of the house. He said, nobody's going to take any of his children. He said he promised my mother that he was going to take care of his own children. Yet, the bus driver referred to him as being a no good and referred to him as being a boy. He was working 3 jobs. So my youngest brother was 1.5 years. I had a sister that was 3 years old, another sister 5 years old, brother 8 years old, I was 10, my older sister was 13, and I had 2 brothers aged 15. My 13-year-old sister became the mother of the family, of us. And we had our own responsibilities and own chores, and we essentially had to take care of ourselves. And because my father was working 3 jobs. And we did a good job at that because, I mean, they all did well. None of them never been arrested. They're all living, and we're very close today. So with that backdrop, I said, now, I decided to join the sit-in. Later, for self-preservation, we was thinking about the plight of African Americans. The goal is much bigger than focusing on myself. So I joined the sit-in, and we would purchase an item, like I say, and we would study at the lunch counter because we still had to pass our courses in college. But things got a little hectic. The KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, joined in, began to try to taunt us, incite us, and trying to provoke us. But our goal was much greater than being provoked. I had been provoked ever since I was 6 years old. And so that was no big deal to me in terms of not to respond to people calling your name or spitting on you or those kind of things. And so I can recall having to walk to school 3.5 miles one way, 6 years old. Now, who would send a 6-year-old kid out of the house in the morning, kiss him, okay, goodbye, and go walk 3.5 miles to school? Well, a 6-year-old. But that wasn't the major challenge. The challenge was the white kids, they rode buses. They would pass us on the road, they would yell obscenity at us, they would throw things at us, bottles, rocks, what have you, and we became a sport to the white kids. So when we saw the bus coming, either direction, we would have to scramble. And I guess they got a kick out of that. And sometimes we had to cross over the other side of the ditch. The roads weren't as wide today as back then as they are today. They're 2-lane roads. And so we have to just kind of get out of harm's way. And so it was no big deal to me in terms of nonviolence, because back then we could not do anything about it because of not only the Jim Crow laws, but however there was a code, a Jim Crow code that we were expected to abide by in terms of our interacting with white individuals. There was nothing my father could do about it in terms of what was happening to us on the way to school. That code was, we were never to assert or even intimate that a white person is lying. Never impute dishonorable intentions to a white person. Never suggest that a white person is from an inferior class. Never lay claim to or suggest superiority or being more intelligent than a white person. Never curse a white person. Never laugh cynically at a white person. And never comment or show signs of endearment towards a white female by a African American or black male, because that could result in a death sentence, and it has resulted in death sentence. So with that, the taunting, really did not bother us. But the football team decided to join us and in hope that that would stop the taunting. So they joined us, and things just got escalated. You know, if you have been to feel as though people are inferior than you, the size of the football team did not intimidate them. It did not. And so things got a little hectic. On this particular day, this was around 1 o'clock, and the manager said there was a bomb threat, and it's going to go off at 1:30. So everybody got to get out. And so, really, that was one way of gaining control of the situation because, you know, it was just about to get out of hand. And so we vacated the store, and we looked back. The manager, they were still inside. And so, if they're really a truly bomb threat, now why are they still there? So the lunch counter closed for a brief period for about 2 weeks. The manager of the store went to the campus and talked to the president of the college, other officials, trying to get us to curtail the sit-in. And they were told that, you know, these are students and they can't control what we do outside of campus, and suggested that they integrate the lunch counter. And the manager said that, well, he would write to their corporate headquarters in New York to ask them to desegregate the lunch counter. In the meantime, they asked us to call a moratorium on the sit-in, and we did. So when they got the response back from their corporate headquarters, when we talk about Woolworth, it's sort of like a Target, maybe larger. It's a corporate giant during that time. It was national. Matter of fact, it was international because they had stores outside of this country. So they came back and stated that they would maintain the local tradition, and that is they would maintain the segregated lunch counters. And so now the sit-in is back on. We began to now disrupt all the businesses downtown because the numbers now have really mushroomed. I mean, due to the media. The businessmen decided that, well, they would take a survey. What you call a moratorium, we would take a survey to see if there is any support for integrating the lunch counter. So they took a survey. So they developed a survey, sent it out, and I think I got about 2,000 responses. And the responses came back, indicated that the lunch counter in all the stores down there should be desegregated. Around 73% was in favor of desegregating all the lunch counters. That is at Woolworth, Crest, and all the other stores that had lunch counters. But they decided that, well, no, we're going to stay with the tradition and not do that. And so now the march is back on. I mean, the sit-in's back on. I can recall Jane Farmer. He was one of the, you would call, I guess, big 6 or 5 civil rights leaders. He came to town. He led a march from campus to City Hall. And here again, this is designed to keep the pressure on and further disrupt things and disrupt businesses. And it began to have a financial impact on that particular store and the businesses in Greensboro. The store in Greensboro was a very successful store, business, and now it has been impacted adversely financially. So we continued the sit-in. Well, we had, during the moratorium, when they took the survey, we curtailed the sit-in at Woolworth, but we moved it over to Crest. In that Crest store, we did have a number of people, probably almost 70, to get arrested for trespassing. But they all were released without having to post a bail. So the movement, like I say, continued to gain momentum. It expanded to many cities throughout North Carolina, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and even the store in New York. Individuals began to sit in there. Thurgood Marshall, who was the legal advisor to the NAACP, he came to town. He spoke at Bennett College, and he encouraged the students to keep the pressure on. You know, Thurgood Marshall went on to be one of the Chief Justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. So when school was let out at the end of May, the local high school, Dudley High School, and the other high schools, they continued to keep the pressure on with the sit-ins. On July 26, 1960, Woolworth Corporate Headquarters CEO decided to integrate the lunch counter. They felt that they should do that before the students came back that summer, came back from the summer break, because they did not know what was going to happen, you know. And so they decided to integrate the lunch counter. This was a major achievement. You know, we won the battle, but we had not won the war, because segregation was still prevalent, Jim Crow law was still alive and in effect, and institutional discrimination still remained. The Jim Crow laws were put in place by a law, so therefore it would take a law to end Jim Crow. And so the pressure continued to apply pressure. The Freedom Riders in 1961 began to continue to apply pressure for a law to be passed to nullify or kill the Jim Crow law. Freedom Riders boarded buses from Washington, D.C. They challenged the segregated lunch counters and the segregated restrooms and restaurants and terminals that served interstate buses. There was a protest against movie theaters, amusement parks, beaches, pools that refused to lower the color barrier. This was coupled with the March on Washington in 1963. I just so happened to join that march in Washington in 1963. And I mean, that was a tremendous occasion, very moving occasion with all the folks there and with the speech given by Dr. King. I will always remember this because I drove down with my current wife. We drove down. She had a Volkswagen Beetle. We drove down from East Orange to D.C. And during that particular time, it took us a little time to get there. And so we had to find a place to stay. And so we were so excited to get down to the mall to join in on the march. And so, but we needed a place to stay. So we stopped at every what hotels we saw, motels we saw, anything looked like a place of accommodation, we would go in and try to see if they had rooms. They didn't have any rooms. And so after going to several different places, we finally stopped at a place and ran in to see if they had a room. They did. We checked in, left all our things there in the hotel, the keys, everything. We got a taxi, went down to the mall. That was a tremendous experience. After the march was over, I guess we had dinner. Now it's time to go back to the hotel. So, okay, so I get a taxi. And we get in a taxi. He asks, where do you want to go? I said, I don't know. But it's in Northeast Washington. Northeast Washington is a big place. I said, it's in Northeast. And he said, okay. And the hotel kind of looked something like this. So he drove us around the Northeast. I got to see the Northeast of Washington for about an hour. Then they pulled to the curb and said, get out. I said, this is not the hotel. He said, yeah, I know it's not the hotel, and you don't know where you're going. Get out. I was fortunate enough I had enough money to pay the fare. And I said, okay, I'll get another taxi. So that's what I did. That's what we did. We got another taxi. And he was driving around Northeast as well. And I can tell this taxi driver was getting frustrated, you know. And so finally I saw a policeman, he was on the street, and I said, stop, stop, you know, stop. And he slammed on the brakes, he stopped. I jumped out and ran out to the policeman. And I explained my situation. Then I described the hotel to him, you know, it kind of looks like this. And he said, oh yeah, that's around the corner. So, I mean, what a big relief, you know, that was. So even though the 1964 Civil Rights Act dealt a death blow to Jim Crow and segregation, Jim Crow really died a slow death. It did not immediately change things. It remained in place by de facto for several years. I can recall in 1965 and 66, I was in the Air Force, and we would perform various military exercises. And I was on cargo planes, and we land in various cities. And based on federal aviation regulation, our crew day, our work day was set, and before we had to go into crew rest. So we would land, have to go into crew rest, and we go to a hotel, and the manager would come out and said, you know, you got a problem. I said, well, what's the problem? Well, you guys can stay, but he can't stay here. And so they would take on the manager, and but he wouldn't bend, would not allow me to stay. And I outranked most of the folks on the crew. I outranked all the enlisted folks. I'm an officer. But yet, you know, I could not stay. Sometimes we'll say, okay, let's go to another place. Then on other occasions, I will tell the crew, look, you guys stay, I'll find some other place to stay at. I'll go across the track. I know I can find a place there. I'll stay there. We'll go to a restaurant. The same thing would happen. Say, you guys got a problem. All right, we can serve you, but we can't serve him. This is after the law was passed. In 1968, two white friends and myself, we bought an airplane, a Cherokee 140, a four-place airplane. And we had it tied down, parked at one particular airport. And occasionally, I would go down and fly and what have you. And mostly, I would fly to Atlantic City to gamble. My friend that would fly up to Stowe, Pennsylvania, Vermont, places skiing, that kind of stuff. And so I came back from a trip. The mission that I was on, it kept me out of the country maybe 15, 20 days a month in terms of supplying Allied forces, our forces, and what have you. So I came back, and I noticed the guys had moved the airplane. I said, well, okay, no big deal. And they told me where it was located. They didn't tell me why they moved it. So a couple months passed, and I said, well, okay, now it's time to go down and fly the airplane. This is a different airport, never been in this airport before. So I go into, I parked. As soon as I pulled up, this gentleman came out to meet me. And I don't know where he came from. He just popped up. And I said, I'm Bob Balley. I know who you are, and I know why you're here, but it's not going to happen. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're here to ruin my business. He had a crop dusting business with airplanes. They normally spray the crops. He said, you're here to ruin my business, and it's not going to happen. I said, Jackson, you mean to say, don't you call me Jackson? And he said, you would not be here if it had not been for President Kennedy. You would not even be in a position to own an airplane. And so he blamed Kennedy for the fact that I'm at his airport. And I said, Jackson, you mean, don't you call me Jackson? And now he's turning red, and so I knew I was going to agitate him by calling him Jackson. That was his last name. That was being disrespectful. I knew I'd been disrespectful. But at that point, you know, now I have to back off because I was afraid he might go in the house and get a gun, or he might even have a gun on him, you know. And so he said, "You're not going to fly your airplane out of this airport." I said, "Okay." I did not know it, but he went to the base and talked to the base commander and told the base commander that I was at his airport and I was there to ruin his business. And he wanted me reassigned away out of Delaware, out of Dover, Delaware, to some other place. I did not know that until the commanding officer told me what had happened, you know. And the reason they had moved it from the airport, the prior airport, was for the same reason. The individual did not want me flying as an African American, flying an airplane out of his airport. And so the base commander said, by no means would he reassign me. And he also required all the individuals that had airplanes at his airport to relocate their airplanes. And so essentially, I did have an impact on his business. I did not know. And so the law was de facto still in place. And you recall the riots taking place because what was promised under the law was not being delivered. Once the law began to be enforced, the 1964 civil rights being implemented, that brought about a major change in society and in the realization of the privileges and benefits we as Americans enjoy today, and the benefits that you enjoy today, and being able to go to a college, integrated college, receive an education, have aspirations of going to law school, have aspirations to become lawyers and judges, and fulfillment of your goals, fulfillment of your dreams. That was not so a number of years ago. But now it is up to you to decide what position you want to take in life and in society. You have to decide in terms of what your goals, what your dreams are. And you have to be motivated enough yourself to pursue them. Because all the hindrance that was in place for me, they're not there. Institutional segregation, institutional discrimination is outlawed. You have a recourse now. There's a price to pay, though, for those institutions and those companies and those businesses that really want to exhibit that kind of conduct or operate in that fashion. There's a big price to pay. And many of them are not willing to pay that price. Otherwise, they won't be in business very long. Look at what happened to Sterling. I mean, billionaire. So there's a price to pay for exhibiting racism and discrimination. So with that, I guess I can open it up to any questions that you might have. What time is it?
I got 12 hours.
Okay. Okay, if any of you have any questions? Yes.
When you said that you're currently actually speak at schools, do you speak at like high schools or colleges or both?
Both. Any place, really. Yeah. Yeah, any place. And so, matter of fact, they released a taping that they did of Law Day that was put on YouTube. And since that time, I've received many, many different calls. And so, you know, that may be my second career, my third career. So, good question. Yes.
I'm sure people don't say enough, but thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.